someone who isn't having the best week, see what I did there? Someone who isn't having the best week is Rishi Sunak, again.
Does he ever have a good week?
Oh, no, he does. He does. Come on, Matthew. Go on,
give me an example of a good week for the Prime Minister.
Let's look at this story that's in the Telegraph today. So political honours are relatively common. In fact, I am Sir Jake Berry, and I was given my knighthood by Her late Majesty the Queen, and then actually by the King as well. I'm one of the 3 people in the country who had to be knighted twice because the Queen died between giving me my honour and it being announced. There we go. There's your tiebreaker in the pub sorted for you. And that tends to be for politicians who've served in Parliament a long time or done something. Mine was for campaigning and designing the levelling up policy.
There we go. Not for services for 4-wheel drives, Jake.
No, not quite. But that's what I got it for. So there are, on this unusual honours list that's been sort of slipped out, and I think that's why we're talking about it, because it's not a normal time. We have the birthday honours, we have the New Year's honours. This is sort of dropped on us out of a clear blue sky. There were 4 members of Parliament, was it 3 members of Parliament, but unusually and quite controversially, according to the Telegraph, a recently recruited Conservative donor, Mohamed Mansour, who's given £5 million to the party, was already given also given a knighthood in this honours list. And that's ruffled a few feathers, my friends at home, because people are sort of looking at it saying, well, you know, Mohamed Mansour, who may be completely, I mean, he's a well-known philanthropist, successful businessman, services to politics, that's what the citation is. Maybe he's absolutely deserving of this honour, I'm sure he is. But it's that closeness to that big political donation to the Conservative Party, less than 2 years, which has really ruffled feathers and got people sort of scratching their heads on this, Matthew, hasn't it?
Well, people are just fed up, I think, with the system whereby people who do give enormous amounts of money to one of the political parties, and by the way, this is not just an issue specific to the Tories, can end up getting knighthoods. Now, as you say, there's no evidence to suggest that he has got this knighthood because he gave money to the Tory party, but what do people at home think? This doesn't say anything.
The big thing is there's no evidence, you're right to say that, but there is the sort of the great British smell test. I think we all have a bit of a nose. And this is not in fine odour, is it?
And this doesn't say anything, by the way, about the qualities, as you've already said, about the donor himself. This is a question about Sunak and his judgment. And it comes
Matthew,
hot.
Why do you think he's decided? I think one of the really interesting things, really interesting here, is why do you think the Prime Minister's decided to break away from the, the cycle of honours? There's a couple of times a year that it happens, and do this sort of extraordinary honours.
You're asking me to speculate.
Well, I am. That's what you're here for. That's what we pay for.
But as I say, there's no concrete evidence, and that's why a Prime Minister can get away with rewarding major donors. And we are in an election year. So if you're asking me to speculate, well, it's perfectly possible that Sunak wants to sort of shore up his donor base. But I say again, this doesn't mean there's anything negative about the donor involved. But this does come, as I was about to say, hot on the heels of this scandal in which another major Tory party donor said quite appalling things, allegedly. If he said what he is quoted as saying, he said racist things about Diane Abbott and misogynistic things.
But Adam Bolton, who was speculating on this in Times Radio, I was listening to Adam Bolton, he said 2 things I thought were really interesting on Times Radio this morning. I'd love you to comment on it in a moment, Chloe. So the first thing Adam said is he suspected that because of the time of year, this may have been planned because they were thinking about a May election.
That's what Adam Bolton said. Not a May election, a June.
Fine. So you sort of...
you mean originally they were thinking about a May election?
So he was saying, so if you were going to have a May election before sort of the purdah started...
Then this would have been decided on... OK,
fine. So this would have come out. Interesting.
Yes.
And then the second thing he said, which, I think he is right about, and Adam is, he's a brilliant political journalist, but I don't think he's of the right of the left. I have no idea who Adam votes for. That's why he's such a good journalist, because he upsets everyone equally. When he said, Tracy Crouch and Harriet Baldwin, brilliant political servants in this case, deserving of their damehoods. That's what Adam said. And I think interesting comments, Chloe. What do you think?
I think that this is probably not because of a decision to call an election in May or June. I think that they will wait till the autumn because it's going to look pretty embarrassing.
So what Adam was saying is, if your working assumption had been that you're going to have an election in May, if, we don't know, then you would have done this to sort of tee up with that. And if you subsequently drop the election, you can't drop the honours list that was part of your working assumption, is what he implied.
Of course.
And Adam's very, very good at these sort of things.
Of course, if it were the case that Rishi was planning to do a June election or May or June election, then yes, of course, he would need to get his honours list pushed through in time for that. But I do not think that that is the case. Because if Rishi Sunak is asked, why are you calling an election earlier than the autumn? The answer everyone's going to know, even if he doesn't say it in those exact words, is our situation is only getting worse. The polling is only getting worse. We're just trying to cut our losses. Best possible chance.
Now, there are some people who I am sorry not to see on the list because, you know, there are people on there who maybe should have been. I was surprised that we haven't seen Ben Wallace. Longest-serving UK Defence Secretary, did a fantastic job. Maybe it is coming. I don't know. I have no understanding of how it works. Except
he was one of Boris Johnson's
men,
wasn't he?
A very lucky recipient of it.
Jake, can we just jump in? He was a Boris Johnson man, more than a Sunak man. So I think that's important to say. The other thing is that all this speculation, which is inevitable in the media, in what will almost inevitably turn out to be an election year, all this speculation about an early election, so-called, it's not going to happen, in my view, and it's a very strong view I hold. And the reason is because the Tories are going to lose the next election, and Rishi Sunak doesn't want to be a Prime Minister for under 2 years. It would be embarrassing for him and for his CV moving forward. So there will not be an early election.
You know, it's almost like you were reading my cards for me because, sorry, pardon me, because we've just got a mega poll that I think we can probably put it up on the screen that's come out in The Sun today, exclusive to The Sun, showing that the Tories, if that were to be election day, if that was the exit poll, the Tories would lose. Interestingly, I was looking at this. Not quite as bad for the Conservative Party as it has been in recent polls. This is a mega poll exclusively in The Sun. You can read about it, but also showing Reform doing very well, which I think is part of the problem. But don't worry, Matthew, we're coming on to that later in the show. Just finally on this honours thing, do you think, and by the way, I think we really do need to see this, that if Keir Starmer becomes the Prime Minister, as that mega poll still on our screens would suggest, that we're going to see a big reform of this honours system? Because Labour has said they're going to reform the House of Lords. I actually doubt they're going to do it. I have my own views about how it should be reformed, but I doubt they're going to do it. And also, I do think, because of the number of these honours lists, particularly the resignation honours to people like Boris, Liz Truss, which were very controversial. I'm not saying people on there weren't deserving, but they were just, the fact they were very controversial. You think the Labour Party will come in and reform the honours system?
Not in the first term. I mean, I think Starmer has said, hasn't he, that he wants to reform the House of Lords. He wants to abolish the House of Lords, but I think it is basically understood that if it were to happen, it certainly wouldn't happen before a second term.
I think that a lot of the time politicians will say that they're going to do things like reform the House of Lords, make various constitutional changes, institutional changes, but actually in reality, when they get into office, it ends up at the end of their priority list, because to ordinary voters, stuff like this is not the top of their list. People want to pay their bills and put food on the table. It's not a top priority for voters. So it just ends up back at the list and never happens, or happens in a superficial manner.